All right, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm going to stand up and do the Sunday school lesson. Usually when I sit down there in the chair, I guess where I'm thinking or whatever, it cuts my hair off. So it makes it harder. I feel more better, you get better hair when you stand up. So good to have everyone here this morning. Last week I wasn't here, and y'all had a good teacher last week. Ron Mason, she's still down there in Florida, enjoying Florida. So she'll be back hopefully in, I think December, I believe, something like that. So hopefully back in December. So today's lesson is on page 32, lesson 8, the death of Elisha. Time and place is 838 BC. The place will be in Samaria. Golden text today comes from the Psalms 116, verse 15. Precious in the sight of the Lord in the death of his saints. Excuse me. Those saints has already started. All right, lesson's aims today is God's grace is not tied to one hand. He can bury his workmen and yet carry on his work. So, I mean, what that lesson aim is trying to say is that God's work never stops. I mean, but his prophets, his workmen, that's what they're talking about, his workmen, his prophets, people who spread his gospel, stuff like that. I mean, we are limited to time. We're definitely limited to time. But that's why we spread the gospel, because we want to spread the gospel to teach somebody else. And that person right there is going to have to start carrying on what you were teaching. But like I said, God will always be, his work never ends. God's work definitely never ends. So, but the workmen, their work does end, but it needs to be carried on. I'm going to read a little lesson background here. Our scripture today comes from 2 Kings chapter 13, 14 through 25. But on the lesson background, it's going to tell us of a few other chapters here that trying to get a little background to this story. It says, chapter 12 contains the reign of Joash. Now I'm going to butcher these names like I always do. I mean, all of them sound the same to me, and I wish they had Bill, Ted, or John, something just easy to talk about.
I didn't always call them Smith and Jones.
I wish I could, Smith and Jones, or just read it by their first letter initial, J, or
Yeah.
But it says chapter 12 contains the reign of Joash, the king of Judah, the repair of the temple, war of Joash there's a war with Joash against the Syrian king Hazael, something like that. The writer returns to this chapter 13, which we'll be studying today, to the history of the Israelites' kingdom, taking it up from the death of Jehu, who was recorded in the closing verses of the chapter. All right, we're going to go on. We're going to get started into the lesson itself. Let's see if I can. The lesson itself is going to be about, it is going to be like the lesson's aim. Is God's grace is not tied to one hand. He can bury his workmen and yet carry on his work. So, I mean, today's lesson is the death of Elisha. So, Elijah is that workman that God's going to talk about here, or the lesson's going to talk about. In 2 Kings 13:14, Now Elijah was fallen sick on his sickness, whereof he died. And Joash, the king of Israel, came down unto him and wept over his face and said, O my father, the chariot of Israel, and the horsemen thereof. Okay, Elijah has fallen sick in this chapter right here. He wants the king of Israel to understand the prophet cannot live forever. But God does, which is exactly what we're saying. The writer says, well, Elijah's peaceful death, well, wait a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself, I'm sorry. Elijah wants to teach Joash that through the prophet's dies, the prophet's God remains. The workman passed away, but the work of God goes on. So Elijah tells a prophecy to Joash. He tells Joash that with the help of God, that Joash will take back his country in 3 great victories, which is going to be Elijah's prophecy. In verse 15, hopefully I ain't going too quick here. Verse 15, and Elijah said unto him, take bow and arrow, and he took unto his bow and arrow. And then verse 16, I'm going to do verse 15 and 16 together. And he said to the king of Israel, put thy hands upon the bow, and he put his hands upon it, and Elijah put his hands upon the king's hands. Now the writer says, Elijah, it was seen, rose from his bed, and took the attitude of an archer, covering the king's 2 hands with his own hand, and making as if he were was pulling back the bow, so that the shooter should be, or at least appear to be, the joint act of himself and the king. The intention was no doubt to show that the power which was to be given to the bow shot was not the king's own power, but came from the Lord through the mediation of his prophet. So in these 2 verses, Elijah is showing Joash that the bow will be a tool, and the joining of the hands in Joash's hands would actually be God's hands. So Elijah's hands is actually God's hands helping Joash. It's not the prophet's hand. God's going to be the guidance of the bow, even though Joash is pulling it back. God's going to be there too. So when Joash lets it go, it's actually God letting it go. And there's a reason that Elijah used this bow as a what would you call it? Like a demonstration kind of deal. This next verse will tell us why he used the bow as the tool. All right, verse 17. And he said, open the window eastward, and he opened it. And Elijah said, shoot. And he shot. And he said, the arrow of the Lord deliverance, and the arrow of deliverance from Syria. For thou shalt smite the Syrians, and I'm going to mess this word, till through have consumed them. Till thou have consumed them. So in this, the writer says in this verse, it was an ancient custom to shoot an arrow or cast a spear into the countries which the army intends to invade. So I mean, that's what they're using the arrow for, the bow and arrow for. Joash is supposed to invade Syria, so I mean I guess you could say throw the first stone or something like that kind of deal. That the arrow he had shot to the arrow was the arrow of the Lord's deliverance, and the arrow pledging deliverance from the yoke of Syria. So in this verse, God really shoots the arrow, showing Joash that he will lead the way. So I mean that's why Elijah's trying to explain to Joash. Like, Joash, I mean, I'm the prophet. I'm passing on. I mean, you ain't gonna have me no more. But you need to have faith in God that He's gonna be with you through these victories, through these trials. So I mean, you gotta have the faith of God. You gotta have the self, I guess, self well-being or self initiation. How can I say that? You got to be obedient. I mean, don't stop until you get done. I mean, just don't think God's going to take care of it. You don't do nothing. I mean, you got to set forward. You know. Anybody got anything to add? I know I'm probably going pretty quick with this.
I like where it says, he wants to teach him that though the prophet dies, the prophet's God remains.
Exactly, yes. Even though the prophet does die, yeah, he does.
And then the work of God has to go on.
Brother Neil, what you were saying too, you know, God is in that. And on this 18th verse, it goes on out, it says God helps those who help themselves.
Exactly. God does help those who help themselves. And see, that right there is, I mean, some people don't understand. They think just all you gotta do is pray and then God just gives it to you. Now, you gotta put forth a little bit of effort yourself. And if you don't, I mean, God will probably, I guess you can say, parallel your intentions. I mean, if you're gonna give, you know, like a little bit of effort, God might parallel you by just giving a little bit of effort itself. He's gonna try to, he'll probably equal what you're giving. Now, if you give it all, boom, He's gonna give it all for you too. He's gonna reward you for it, you know. So I mean, like you said, God helps those who help themselves. So if you ain't gonna help yourself, I mean, God's gonna give you the guidance to help yourself. But if you ain't gonna do it, like I said, He's probably just gonna parallel what you're giving at. All right, verse 18. And he said, take the arrow, and he took it. And he said unto the king of Israel, smite upon the ground. And he smite thrice and stayed. Elijah had already told Joash that he should smite the Syrians until they were consumed. So what Joash did, and this verse right here, Joash shot 3 times and pretty much quit. I mean, he went through the motions, doop, 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 and then he just quit. Now that right there showed like a lack of faith, lack of how can you say that? Lack of self-initiation kind of deal on Joash's part. Elijah tells him God is with you, so you don't stop. I mean, you need to give it your all. Elijah's telling Joash, you need to shoot until you can't shoot no more. Don't stop because you think, you just went through the motion, oh, I'm done. No, you need to keep going and don't stop. I mean, keep going until your body just is exhausted.
It goes on to say here, the lack of faith leads to low expectations and feeble efforts.
Yes,
And then when you do that, then you're kind of defeating what God has done.
exactly, yeah. So, yes, the lack of faith does show the lack of effort. Yeah. So, I mean, and that lack of effort will carry on. I mean, if you have it's like what they say, like if you're, say you're practicing something, and if you practice something with a lack of effort, you're only going to be as good as what you put into it. So, I mean, they always say, oh, if you're going to practice 110%. I know, what was it, I think it was in the Marines, I believe it was. They said, practice makes perfect. This one instructor had said, practice, one guy said, practice makes perfect. And he said, no, it ain't. He said, perfect practice makes perfect. So, I mean, that's what they say, perfect practice makes perfect. Not just practice makes perfect. Right. Verse 19. And the man of God was wroth with him, and said, thou should have smitten 5 or 6 times, and hadn't thou set in Syria till thou hast consumed it, whereas now thou shalt smite Syria but thrice. Well, that's a tongue twister right there. It's good, right? So Elijah was angry at the lukewarmness of Joash and his lack of faith and zeal. He himself, from the higher standing point, saw the greatness of the opportunity and abundance of the favor which God was ready to grant, and the way in which God's favor was stated and narrowed by Joash's lack of repetitiveness. So Joash, he wouldn't hot for God, he was lukewarm for God, I guess you could say, I mean, his lack of shooting the arrow, smiting the arrow into the Sumerians' land. God was right there. It said right here that God was. I mean, he was ready to carry him into it. I mean, all it was needed was Joash to actually set forth a bigger effort than what he was doing. But I had over here. So I wrote in here in my notes, it said, if Joash will give his all in the bold demonstration, God was ready to deliver the Samaritans to him in victories. I mean, just right off the bat. It was like, you start it, you give your all, we'll finish it together. So, I mean, verse 14 through verse 19 was pretty much the demonstration of the bow that Elijah was trying to teach his king, the king of Israel, not God. He was trying to give him guidance before he passes on. He was trying to give Joash some guidance before he passes on. Pretty much letting him know that, don't rely on me to help you reign this country. You need to rely on God to help you reign this country. Lead the Israelites. Now, second part of this lesson, it's going to shy away from the bow demonstration and everything that Elijah was trying to teach Joash. This part in verse 20 and 21, verses 20 21, we're going to learn about the prophet's tomb, which is Elisha's tomb after he passes. And it's got some interesting things that happen in this as well. Verse 20, and Elijah died, and they buried him. And the band of Moabites invaded the land at the coming of the year. Now, and in this verse right here, the Israelites were honored to bury their second prophet, Elisha, because the first prophet before Elijah was Elijah. And, of course, they didn't get to bury him because he was taken up in a whirlwind. No. So they really didn't get to honor him as their prophet, I don't know how their little ceremonies went or whatever, but that prophet right there was just taken from them in the blink of an eye in that whirlwind. But here they have Elisha, so they're able to take his body, prepare it, put it into they were talking about into a vaulted chamber. And as this was going on, there was the Moabites. I guess they were invading the lands, and I guess there were some casualties taken, and that's what's going to be significant in this next verse in 21. And it came to pass, as they were burying a man, that behold, despite a band of men, and they cast the man into the sepulchre of Elijah. And when the man was let down and touched the bones of Elijah, he arrived and stood up on his feet. Now the writer says that the bearers of the dead man, which were the men that had the dead body, struck with terror as they approached the enemies. Instead of carrying their remains of their appointed resting place, which the dead body, instead of carrying it somewhere and resting it somewhere else, burying it somewhere else, pushed them into the sepulchre where slept the bones of Elijah. So they took a dead body and they actually dropped it down where Elijah was buried. And when that dead body hit Elijah's bones, it pretty much came to life. That's what they're talking about here. Even though Elijah was dead and buried, his body was holy enough to revive a dead man. This incident shows that the prophet's work pretty much will live on kind of deal. His body was, as God would say, was so holy to God that even anything that would touch it would be revived kind of deal. Would feel the glory of this prophet's dead bones. And back here, I don't know if y'all have this in your book or not, but it says though Elijah was taken to heaven as Elijah was without tasting of death, he had yet great honor, but upon his death, God set a seal on his prophet work by making life-giving power to issue even from the grave. So, Elijah's bones had life-giving power. The miracle suggests to us that the fact that from every good man's grave there issues an important sense of life-giving power. The influence of men does not die with them. On the contrary, it is often greater after their death than during their lives. Sometimes, in a literal sense, the graves is a such of a new life to men. In the act of committing dust to dust and ashes to ashes, holy impressions seal over men. New resolve takes possession of their hearts. Many a man had been brought to his senses at the grave side of the father or the mother. So what they're talking about right here is, I mean, Elijah's, like we were saying, Elijah's body was still life-giving. He was that much of a prophet. I mean, that's how much God followed him. Yeah. So I mean, that right there, in a way, is why Elijah's prophecies were fulfilled, because God honored his prophet for his work that he did while he was here on earth. Even though his bones were, even though his body was done here at earth, I mean, his visions, his work, and everything still moved on. And I mean, you can see that too with Elijah, where he was trying to teach Joash, as Elijah, who's in his deathbed, he didn't give up. So I mean, he's saying that he's needing to teach Joash one more time, give him one more vision, I guess, for the future kind of deal for the land of Israel. Like, hey, you need to honor God. You need to give everything you have to God. You need to honor this vision that I have. That way you can move on, because I'm not going to be here. So, the third part of this lesson is Elijah's prophecy fulfilled. So in verse 22, you read my notes right here, that way I don't get a loss of thought. Well, my wife ain't here. She hear me saying that loss of thought, she'd be like,
I go through that myself.
yeah.
So I take it you don't want us to tell them?
Oh, you can tell them. You can tell them. If she say, oh, you admitted that? Yeah. Oh, my goodness.
It happens to the best of us.
That's right.
I just call it a senior moment.
There you go. Senior moment.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much.
I'll call it a pre-senior moment.
You're not there.
That's right. All right, verse 22. Hazael, king of Syria, oppressed Israel all the days of Jeho. I'm just going to say J or whatever. Jeho. Anybody know how to say that? Huh? Jehoshaphat.
Maybe.
Jehovah's. Sounds good. Sounds good. Okay, so this verse right here is saying that Hazael, king of Syria, outlived Jehoshaphat, which was Joash's father. So Joash's father pretty much, I guess, passes on, but this Hazael, king of Syria, I mean, he keeps, I guess, fighting Israel and stuff like that, and keeps taking the lands a little bit, having great victories over Israel. 23, and the Lord was gracious unto them, and had compassion on them, and had respect to them, because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and would not destroy them, which he's talking about. Lord will not destroy the Israelites all the way, neither cast them from the presence as yet. So, the writer has on here, even in his wrath, God thinketh upon mercy, while he was still punishing Israel by the sword of Hazael, he was yet careful not to make a full end, not to allow the afflictions to proceed too far. He still preserved the nation and kept it in being. God's covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob was a covenant of mercy. By it, he had pledged himself to multiply their seed, to be their God, and the God of their seed after them. So what he was, God was doing, he was letting, Hazael, win victories over Israel. But he wasn't letting this king wipe out Israel. He was just letting them hit them, take a little bit of their land, not letting them have everything, but well, what he was actually doing, God was actually doing, he was setting the scene for Joash.
Amen.
He was setting the scene for Joash to show Joash that Elisha's prophecy was going to be fulfilled. So he was letting this king take Israel a little bit, and without taking it completely. So this king, in verse 24, he's going to die, and his son's going to reign instead. So in verse 24, it says, so Hazael, king of Syria, died, and Ben-Hadad, his son, reigned in his stead. So, okay. Now we got a new king of Syria. Which that's part of the fulfillment of God. How he was getting ready to show Joash, about Elijah's prophecy. All right, 25. Now this right here is pretty much where the prophecy is fulfilled. And Joash, the son of Jehoshaphat, took again out of his hand of Ben-Hadad, the son of Hazael, the cities, which he had taken out of his hand of, his father by war. 3 times did Joash beat him and recovered the cities of Israel. These victories were according to the prediction of Elijah. Now, remember at the beginning of the verses, verse 19, Elijah was pretty much letting you know, you need to get your ducks in a row kind of deal. You're going to have great victories. You are going to get your father's, the king before you, your father's Israel back. So, these victories were very decisive. We learn from their fruits. For Joash took from the Syrians the cities which Hazael had took from Israel. Excuse me. So like I said, Hazael, God was letting Hazael take the cities away from Israel. He was building that up. That way Joash, the son of Jehoahaz, or he would be the one to have great victories, fulfill Elijah's prophecy, to I guess you can say, bring Israel back together again. All right. Any questions, comments? Anybody else have any?
Just says here on that verse 25 down here, thus God accomplished his word of judgment and his word of mercy. So it was accomplished what God wanted.
Yes. Yeah. Thus God accomplished his word of judgment and his word of mercy.
And I think the main reason that he was gracious to him is he had a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yes.
So,
Definitely.
He was going to multiply.
Wonder, what do you think it would have been if he didn't have that covenant?
Well, I don't know. But I think the Lord knew all along what he was doing.
Oh, yeah.
What I'm saying is,
That's what I said when he was letting King of Syria, win victories over Israel, but not really taking them completely. I think that's what God was setting the stage right there, But he did, I'm not sure how long it took him to, I'd say it's probably years before the prophecy was fulfilled, I would
You
think.
know, what I don't understand, it's just like, when he let them out of,
Egypt.
Egypt, and he was supplying food and everything, and then they turn around and want to worship other gods.
Oh, yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I guess why I'm thinking people are crazy.
It's the way they do nowadays.
Yeah.
Same thing
Yeah.
they, we're supposed to be a God-driven nation, and we do a lot of things, what is like abortion.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's wrong, the Bible says it's homosexual, the Bible says it's an abomination to the Lord. They go down, go back here.
Yeah.
And, one of these days, he's gonna get tired of the United States doing what they're doing.
Oh, yeah, I'd say you probably already.
I'd say the only thing that's stopping them from doing anything right at the minute is there's a few people here that still seeking God.
And the thing about it too, I mean, there's gonna be that, like you said, there's gonna be innocent people that's gonna have to suffer.
The only thing about it, he's a forgiving God and a loving God. And, I think as long as there's a few people that's seeking,
Yeah.
I think he has mercy.
And see, that's the thing, I mean, what we probably see that, I mean, God, like you did in here, God's probably setting the stage on the United States right now.
Yes.
I mean, with this pandemic and all, whatever's going on, how we're, bringing our people that's supposed to be our, administration, how we're bringing them in and stuff like that, it's God's plan. I mean, pretty much, we're along for the ride, I know that. And it's possible too, I mean, we might be the ones that's gonna suffer for it.
Sort of, a lot of this may be just the fulfillment of the Bible. Too.
Yeah.
When you read your Revelation.
Yeah.
It's just fulfillment of the Bible.
Yeah. I mean, it might not be in our lifetime, but I mean, he's at that stage right now.
The only thing about, the Lord is, a day to him may be 100 years to us.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah, he don't have a time trouble.
Well, I mean, a day to him is, I'd say a whole lot longer than it is for us. And I think when you get to heaven, it's gonna be, it ain't gonna be day and night, all that stuff, it's gonna be, right on, I mean, and everything's gonna be glory.
Mm-hmm.
It's me is with this COVID and this pandemic and stuff. People, God could end that just like that.
Oh, yeah.
But people, they don't have the faith and stuff to believe that he can. And we've got these people.
And what is it? I mean,
People and
well, one thing about it, I mean, it's funny that, well, it's not funny actually, but it's just ironic that God is showing us the vision.
Well, and people, even though we got this COVID and everything, people's not seeking the Lord's help.
No.
That's the thing. I mean, when you ask God for help, I think, and you're serving God, he'll help. When you just leave God out of it,
Mm-hmm.
and none of these, you don't hear the Bible say, we need to pray that the Lord will help us. You don't hear him say that.
That's a good point. Remember back when the Gulf Wars, I know I was there riding the truck and I was up in Minneapolis and they were telling about how many body bags they were sending, Remember the people were in the churches and Christian groups?
Yeah, everybody was coming together, yeah.
Yeah.
And as soon as it was over with, it's all done, they're not out there anymore.
And you got too many people, I mean, they're just they don't seem to care about one another.
That's the truth.
I mean, I see many people, I mean, and I could probably be guilty of it myself. That, they get in them hard times and, oh, I gotta get to church, I need to get to church. Once they get to church, get over those little bit of a hard times, yeah, they just part themselves away from God again.
I mean, I'm a firm believer, if you want the Lord to help you, you gotta serve him.
Yeah.
I mean, I may believe in those two myself, but that's what I.
Now, Eddie, one thing that you said, I think people, it's a good way to put it, stupid. It's like when Jesus was in the boat with the disciples and they come across in the storm hit. And Jesus wasn't worried about it, he's laying in the sea. These men, just like he said, they've seen him do miracles after miracle. And what, so you're gonna let us die?
Yeah.
You know, Jesus is there.
Yeah.
I think, well, he did say sometime, their faith was lacking.
It says, oh, you men of little faith.
Yeah.
I know he'll help you.
Yes.
You've gotta ask him and you've gotta believe that he will help.
Oh, yeah, you just can't go through the motions. Like, Joe Asher, he was shooting that boat, he was just going through the motions. Shot it 3 times,
And you know, you can pray for your unsaved brother, but he's not gonna save them until they ask.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. People's gotta, you know, you can pray day and night. And now he can put the deepest burden in their heart that they will pray. But what I'm saying is, they have to do the praying themselves. You can't pray them into heaven. Or pray them to be saved. And if they're sick, you can pray for them. If they see his will, he can touch them. And he may touch them. But after a while, I just feel like if they don't use
You should behave.
he kind of worried about it.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that.
And
It's
I
like,
think if you ask the Lord for forgiveness or help, I don't care who you are, he'll listen.
Amen.
and the thing about it, I mean, that's one thing, I mean, is not being preached enough. I mean, that's the thing, I mean,
I've heard sermons on people that the Lord convicts over and over and over down through the years. And then finally, his spirit is not working anymore.
mhm,
And they go too far and they can't find forgiveness anymore.
Yeah.
Because they grieved the Lord. So he is a fair God, but he also doesn't forget to do judgment on
oh, yeah.
And you can do that to yourself if you're not careful.
And you know, you look at these churches, they ain't in here, but you can have a UK ball game in places.
Yeah.
Sold
Sold out, yeah.
I guarantee you put a big sweet TV up there, or you can't get it, like a big pack.
There you go. Yeah. Well, you want to do a few questions real quick? We got a few minutes. Question number 1, why is Joash sad at Elijah's death?
I think it's because he knows that Elisha was a man of God.
And I'd say Elijah was one that was pretty much guiding as well.
Well, he realized that the loss of him would affect Israel for years to come.
Question 2, what assurance does Elijah give him?
By shooting an arrow at the window, that the Lord would,
Yeah, even though I'm gonna be gone, God will always be with me. Question 3, why was Elijah angry when Joash only struck 3 times?
Ain't good.
telling me I always shot the tower 6 times.
What is the great-
Patience. Has had lack of patience, lack of faith, hindered him. He just give up.
Here's a good question here. What is the greatest hindrance to Christian work?
I think obedience and faith.
I agree.
How did God honor Elijah even after death? Pretty much let his prophecy be fulfilled. How many a Christian be a blessing to others even after death? How may a Christian be a blessing? I was gonna say that doesn't sound right. How may a Christian be a blessing to others even after death?
If they stand faithful to the Lord, people remember that.
Exactly. I mean, they're gonna remember you what you've done, they ain't gonna, or what you left behind.
They remember the spirit.
Okay. Why was God so long suffering with Israel?
I think because he had promised Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and he was his word. And that's what I like about God. No matter what happens, you read that Bible, and it doesn't change. He said, "Turn God is the word." And Moses walked the earth as he is today.
And of course, how was Elijah's prophecy fulfilled?
Well, he did. The Lord got the land back to him.
All right, well, till next week on Sunday school, so, everybody join us at 11, ones that are watching on Facebook.